Today, I want to talk about the most common one-on-one conversations I had with staff as an administrator. The daily pace of administration can be so busy that I really needed to take time to ground myself before each conversation. If I didn't, I had a harder time being present and really giving the conversation the respect and attention it deserves. In this video, I'm going to talk about the 3 most common types of one-on-one conversations that I had as an administrator, starting with feedback, then we'll talk about informative, and finally wrap up with disciplinary. Starting with feedback conversations, these are the most nuanced amongst the 3 because they really depend on the staff's preferences. I see these as collaborative discussions aimed at really helping the staff improve their growth areas and reach their desired goals. I usually had feedback conversations throughout the evaluation process, for mentoring, when people needed advice on something, and even during team meetings to help the overall team's effectiveness. The way I like to think about these meetings is like planning a road trip. So the staff member is the driver, and they're the ones who choose the destination, plan the route along the way, and also choose the activities they want to do on their road trip vacation. And then as the administrator, we're more like the travel agent, where before the trip, we give them insights, ideas, and suggestions of how they can make their trip smoother and more enjoyable. For feedback meetings, the key thing to remember is that the purpose is support. I always made sure to ask staff what are their feedback preferences. So for example, during evaluations, I would ask what are their preferences around the tone, the level of directness, even the type and format of the delivery. So do they prefer to see it in writing, maybe through an email, and then talk about it in person? Or are they the type who just like to dive right in during in-person conversations? Again, in these meetings, you're really a thought partner and there to support the journey that the staff has already identified. Next are informative conversations. These are usually brief and address sensitive topics that the staff member may not be aware of. They usually stem from warranted concerns or complaints. So examples of what conversations fall in this category are addressing hygiene or odor issues, pointing out a wardrobe malfunction, discussing the accidental use of work email for personal matters, or even being mindful of where personal phone call conversations are happening because the school walls can be thin. In informative type of meetings, the key is to be factual and empathetic. Honestly, these conversations can be a little bit awkward, so what helps me get through them is knowing that if I were in their shoes, I would want to know these things too. Also, drawing your relationships with staff and be strategic about which leader is having the informative conversation, particularly with sensitive topics like wardrobe malfunctions. The last type is a disciplinary conversation. This happens when a staff member crosses a professional boundary and consequences have to be given. Depending on the severity, there are options to choose a more informal approach where it's accountability between the administrator and the staff member, or a more formalized approach where the consequence ends up being on the staff's permanent record. The key point here is to be direct and factual. Clearly communicate the professional boundary that was crossed and the corresponding consequence. I do want to clarify that in this type of meeting, I'm referring to the final meeting after all of the investigation and other sort of conversations have happened. The reason why I was extra intentional in distinguishing conversations is because of my experiences with overlapping feedback and informative ones. For example, when I popped into classrooms, I might notice something that I think could be improved. But when I really thought about it, these improvements were very nitpicky. In reality, these improvements are based on my own biases from my experiences, my preferences, and my expectations. These improvements aren't going to drastically change anything. They're not a high priority. And it was actually coming from a place where I felt like I needed to offer some new sort of information or expertise to fit the stereotypical expectation and pressure that a leader is supposed to be an expert in everything. So in these cases, what I thought was collaborative feedback actually ended up turning into an informative meeting with condescending undertones because my improvements were really subjective. Also, staff weren't looking for feedback in the way that I was sharing it. Once I started to become more mindful of the conversation, the purpose, and my role, I was able to greatly improve my relationships with staff. Not all feedback has to be shared, especially if it's not urgent, a priority, and it's simply a preference. If it is something that jeopardizes safety or is a priority, that then transitions out of a feedback meeting potentially into an informative one or even a disciplinary one. Really, the most important thing is that during feedback meetings, you're a supportive thought partner in helping the staff reach their goals. In informative meetings, a compassionate counterpart bringing awareness to sensitive topics, and in disciplinary meetings, an assertive and fair leader. So those are the 3 different types of conversations I would have with staff. I hope that you found this video helpful, and if you have any questions, please put them in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I hope you experienced the joy of doing something you love today.